All right, guys, thank you so much. We are continuing with our Seeing Through Gebser series, and we have some more outlines to do just to kind of ease us into the aperspectival world, ease us into the world of integral consciousness, and we are picking up where we left off last week. I missed you guys very much, and thank you guys for watching. So we are going to continue now. I have to say, I was rereading this for the sake of this lecture here. And as far as outlines go, there's some pretty good stuff in this episode, I think. I think it's going to be some good stuff. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Let's see if I can move my book here real quick. Okay, quote. We shall have to become accustomed to recognizing acategorical elements and the preeminent acategorical magnitude, time, as an intensity. Its binding and integrating function is expressed in its acategorical efficacy. Our previous and strictly categorical mode of thinking must be complemented by and integrated with the addition of the acategorical mode of realization. So I think in a previous lecture I said you need to drop the quantifiable categorical thing. I think I made a mistake there. It's not necessarily drop it, maybe scale it back to moderate reason. Because it needs to be integrated and complemented with aperspectival perception, which is to say our ability to understand things visually must be complemented by our perception of invisible aspects. He continues, we will have no success with mastering the tasks given to our epoch unless we have the courage to supersede the merely three-dimensional spatially conceived systems. This is not to say that we must reject them, only that they have been reduced to their proper magnitudes and extensities, rejecting 3D rational systemizing categorical ways of doing things. We're not rejecting them entirely. I apologize if I said that in a previous video. That was stupid of me. I should not have said that. What we're bringing them back, putting in their proper place, and integrating with everything else, kind of like everything else with integral consciousness. Intensities, hitherto spatialized and fixed, demand their own mode of arrangement, systasis. Wherever we are able to perceive acategorical effectualities as such and not as categorical fixities, the world will become transparent. We are then no longer tied to the spatial structure of systems, but will be able to see through them systatically or integratively. The transparently or diaphanously emerging space will then no longer be a three-dimensional but already a four-dimensional reality. With the terms of, quote, four-dimensional, and particularly fourth dimension, the form in which time is manifest in a physical sense, we have touched upon a key in a certain sense that can be of aid in clarifying our predicament. The fact that the vast complex time, encompassing and co-constituting the world, has been ignored for centuries, even excluded from knowledge, or at best falsely spatialized, has left us unprepared to cope with the extraordinary implications of the phenomenon of time just when modern knowledge thrust it on our attention. As long as the epoch paid tribute to the three-dimensional world conception, time remained a suppressed force, and as such appeared with a vengeance when it was finally freed itself. So the problem is, we're in a 4D world. We've been in a 4D world since Einstein, and yet we are continuing with our deficient 3D way of doing things. We're repressing time. We are not dealing with it healthily. We are abstracting it to impose distance between us and space so we can confer a greater degree of psychological unity in relation to whatever so it doesn't oppress us, so it doesn't repress us, so it doesn't suppress us. We're trying to abstract it to impose distance, which will in turn impose or confer an understanding, which in turn will reduce the fear and the anxiety and all that stuff. Like any suppressed or repressed force, when first released, it overpowers, frightens, and confuses us in a destructive manner and seems to hold the upper hand. Because we were accustomed for generations to the old conception, we thought ourselves able to dominate it with our spatializing falsification. Imprisoned in our three-dimensional conceptual world, we believed time to be no more than an easily subdued and harmless accessory which could be employed with impunity merely as clock time. So you're seeing, if you watch my Kill Rationalism Part 9, I believe it is, maybe Part 8, the what is time, the rational destruction of time. That's what we did. Time is just clock time. It's this external, continuous thing that always marches on, and that's it. That is a bastardization of time. That is bullshit, and we will be getting into it. Since it turns out that time is much more, indeed is a world constituent, the degree of repercussions in the wake of this knowledge has been in proportion to the discrepancy between our previous estimation of time and its actual and enduring efficacy. But this discrepancy is so pronounced that we can only gradually realize that time means more than clock time. Beautifully said. Time first erupted into our consciousness as a reality or world constituent with Einstein's formulation of the four-dimensional space-time continuum. That is to say, at the beginning of the present century. Excuse me. Consciously or unconsciously, the time question has played a principal role in the natural sciences ever since. As a consequence of the new scientific theories, its interpretation and estimation have undergone an almost unnoticeable but gradual year-by-year modification. And that's what we're going to see. That's what we're going to be getting into later on. The problem of time is being dealt with for the first time, no pun intended, in all these different areas. So in physics, you have Einstein's space-time continuum, and then you have Planck's quantum theory, and you have all this stuff. In biology, you have things like chronogenesis, this idea of the idea of measurable continuous biological processes manifesting discontinuously. There is an invisible intensity of time that manifests discontinuously that affects space. So a child may show signs of autism at 2, while another child may show signs of autism at 5. So you can see there's a weird, there's a four-dimensional aspect being accounted for here, and you're even going to see in psychology too. And then, of course, in philosophy and Heidegger and stuff. So. Okay. Prior to the exposition of the relativity theory, which is unthinkable without the time component, true, Planck advances quantum theory. Quantum theory is going to be very important. Understanding quantum theory, just a basic pop understanding, which I should be able to give you guys. I'm not a scientist. I've said this a trillion times. I don't claim to have some. Gebser has knowledge of this stuff, and he's kind of dumbing it down for us. You just have to know the basics. That's it. But that will be very important, because once you understand that we're out of this continuous external duration and we're in with discontinuous intensities from moment to moment rather than all moments being equal in duration, that will be very important. I will try to slow down when that comes up. Planck advances quantum theory. The result was that linear continuity and the succession of temporal events were abandoned in favor of individual temporal impulses. This was followed by Niels Bohr, and the wave mechanics of de Broglie, and Schrödinger, which gave validity to the principle of complementarity. The principle of complementarity, as well as the uncertainty principle, are going to be two things that destroy the object-subject dualism, so important to rationality. There's no real object-subject, because in the uncertainty principle, or the probability, whatever it is, you can't really know things ultimately. And then two, of complementarity, there's no real subject or object. It's subject and object. So interesting stuff. And plus in science, with physics, with space-time, we're no longer appealing to an objective place in space. We're appealing to a relative place in space-time. So we're appealing to positions. This destroys the object-subject dualism. According to the principle of complementarity, both matter and light are to be understood as being corpuscle as well as wave. They become visible in a sense both as a spatial magnitude, as it were, and as a temporal element. In biology, the mutational theory of de Vries implicitly demonstrates time as an intensity, and mutation theory, together with quantum theory, wave mechanics, and the theory of relativity, form the four cornerstones of our present-day natural sciences. In addition, psychoanalysis makes it possible for us to speak today of a time phenomenon that could be called time condensation, which occurs in psychic events and is manifest, for example, in dreams. And finally, technology outdoes itself from year to year in shrinking space by mastering time and temporally condensing great distances, either by supersonic aircraft or by narrowing them toward the temporal 0 point via radio and television. So we can see how what we're going to see here is technology, in many ways, is a misapplied value. We use technology as time as a mode of mastering and conquering space. This is not good. This is time as an extensity. This is the rationalist bastardization of time. The airplane is it's a manifestation of our understanding of time for the first time, no pun intended. But also, what are we using it for? We're not using it to intensify space. We're using it to conquer space, which is to say, we're using it as a spatialized phenomenon. Don't do that. We meet up with the same preoccupation in art. The introduction of time in paintings, the introduction of time in painting destroys the pictorial content, or, admittedly less frequently, shapes it according to different laws, as in the work of Joan Gris, Braque, and Picasso. And leaving aside other disciplines like philosophy, we can observe in poetry how the scenes and acts unfold in the plays of Thornton Wilder and Ferdinand Bruckner in utter disregard of clock time, creating expressive possibilities for truly four-dimensional time. In all these examples, time freedom has already come into view. So when he mentions Picasso, if you remember that little picture I showed in the book here in one of the first lectures in this series, very clearly we can see that the perspectival way, the realistic to the eye way of doing things in art is gone. That's done. And we can see that with Picasso pretty clearly. The completely novel foundations of the new theories in science and of the means of expression in the arts rest on the inclusion of the time factor into the rigid, materialistic, and spatially conceived systems prevalent until 1900. I'll skip ahead, and then he says, we are confronted here with the eruption of the fourth dimension into the three-dimensional world, which in its first outburst shatters the three-dimensional world. At first, the unmastered time threatens to destroy space and its framework. In Dadaism, for example, it destroyed the structure of a sentence. So Dadaism was this very loose collection of essentially what we can now understand as anti-rationalists. I don't know if they understood that at the time, but they either consciously or subconsciously rebelled against this idea of everything has to be ordered. They rebelled against rationalism. That's really what it was. And you can see it in the sentence. The sentence is ordered. So we're going to mess with the sentence because order, logic, these are complicit in the destruction of aspects of the world and the human condition that the Dadaists want back. That would just say that the Romantics, the Dionysian types, those kind of guys. Interesting stuff there. And I think Duchamp was technically part of the Dadaism with his urinal, ridiculous nonsense. In Expressionism and Surrealism, time disrupted the spatial structural context, exploded the pictorial content, and mutilated the form. This is interesting. In psychoanalysis, it is a constant threat to consciousness because of the psychic inflation and disruption of the fabric of rational thought. So, remember, time is an intensity, and as it is mutating into our consciousness, time is energy. So our consciousness has been overwhelmed by this increase in energy, which is in turn destroying our ability to think rationally, this sort of very basic, continuous, ordered thought. It's very difficult to think rationally when you're being pushed almost automatically into energetic biases and stuff like that. So with the reimmersion of the magical, mythical, and now integral, all this energy is in our consciousness, but it breaches the limit of validity, if you will, or acceptability of rational thought. It's overwhelming our ability to think rationally. I think you can understand this in the political world. In biology, the unmastered time initiated an unchecked increase of concern with the quote-unquote life force or elan vital, and for a long time, biology was exposed to the danger of suffocating in an extreme vitalism. We'll get to that later on. Even in physics, the eruption of time has brought the threat of the ultimate destruction of matter and space, as demonstrated by the atomic bomb. Let us rest our case for the moment with these examples. So obviously what he just explained there was the unmastered, unconscious engagement with time is destroying space. I think it makes complete sense when you take a new dimension with its own way of doing things and you bastardize it and you try to shove it in your rationalist box. It's never going to work, and now we got problems. But in discussing this question, we should not ignore the fact that there are intimations of the subsequent eruption of time into the three-dimensional world conception during the 3 generations preceding Einstein. It was Einstein's theory of relativity which invalidated the previous exclusive claim of the Copernican world system and replaced it with the space-time continuum. As a consequence, we can no longer conceive of the world as being infinite and unbounded, but rather, quote, finite yet unbounded. That is a paradox, my friend. Infinite and unbounded makes sense, right? Finite, how can something be finite and also unbounded? Here's why. It's finite in the sense that the world is finite insofar as there is a limit to space here. And the world did come into being, and we might not know the exact time, but it did come into being. And it could end. There is a finite, there is a limit here. But it's also unbounded because time is no longer conceived of as this external continuous duration, and is now conceived of as moment to moment. Each moment is a new energy packet, which is different than the one that preceded it in terms of scale, and the one that will precede it in terms of scale, but is similar to those preceding and proceeding moments insofar as they are all pregnant with the past, present, and future. So, where was I going? That's right. So it's finite insofar as there is a limit here, but it is unbounded insofar as time is no longer, there's no endpoint in time. It can't be, because that would be a time as a continual external duration. There's no endpoint, so it's unbounded in that sense, as each new moment is kind of a new thing. There's no end goal here. We just have to kind of make our own end goal. We are obliged, in other words, to realize not only a totally new perception of reality that is diametrically opposed to the previous conception, but we are also compelled to become fully conscious of time, the new component, not just as physical geometric fourth dimension, but in its full complexity. We can, of course, concede that this necessity was at first restricted to physics. But what has occurred subsequently? More and more sciences began to wrestle with the time factor. Some have partially achieved an integral mode of observation, while others worked with four-dimensional factors, which led to such tangible results as nuclear fission. There's a guy in the biology section we're going to get to, Portman. That dude, he understands integral consciousness. Gebser quotes him for like 4 paragraphs, and it's just every word is just beautiful. At the same time, the non-scientific world, notably heads of state and economic leaders, held on to their already obsolete three-dimensional, dualistic, materialistic world conception, although they were already utilizing four-dimensional achievements. So they're using all these four-dimensional achievements, planes, helicopters, bombs, all this great stuff, but they don't really realize they're doing it. So they're bastardizing it. They're trying to put it into the rationalist box. And what do we get? We get suicide of Europe in the West. We get World War I, World War II, and then we get all this ridiculousness, this anti-civilizational far right and far left stuff. It's just ridiculous. These they employ falsely, that is, in an inappropriate three-dimensional manner. Oh, this is funny. I'm going to repeat that. These they employ falsely, that is, in an inappropriate three-dimensional manner. And behold, the great amazement and consternation now that this entire world edifice began to fall apart. See, Gebser does have a sense of humor. I know he can be a bit of a snob, and that has been a persistent criticism. He's not like he's a flawless guy, but he does have a bit of a humor. He's put, and behold, exclamation point. The great amazement that everything is beginning to fall apart now that we have this new dimension that's incredibly powerful, incredibly intense, and that we can use it to better our lives, but we're using it to worsen our lives, and now we're shocked that our lives are being worsened. Quote, I have no time, unquote. This millionfold remark by man today is symptomatic. Quote unquote, time, even in this still negative form, is his overriding preoccupation. But when speaking of time, man today still thinks of clock time. How shocked he would be if he were to realize that he is also saying, quote, I have no soul, unquote, and, quote, I have no life, unquote. For perspectival man, time did not yet pose a problem. Only man today who is now awakening or mutating toward the aperspectival consciousness takes note of every hour of his apparent lack of time that drives him to the brink of despair. I want to make a point. I made this realization. So let's take mental rational time. Of course, we've already talked about, we're not going to go over too far. We keep dividing. So now there are 24 hours in a day, right? So these mental temporal units, in terms of hours, we'll say, we've divided up and we've treated them as real. We've reified them. What happens when we treat time as space and we divide everything into these little units? Well, like Gebser says, now we have time to kill. Now we have time to fill. So we can see how our understanding of time is affecting our movements in a spatial world. Now that we have hours and something must be killed or filled within those hours, that means we are necessarily being driven toward action. But the problem is we are being driven towards action for the sake of action, for the sake of filling or killing time, not listening to time as an intensity to guide us to more spiritually, culturally, and individually more fulfilling routes or whatever we want to do. So this, I believe, is an origin of this idea that we get in modern society where everyone's just working just to die. Why do they feel that way? Because they're filling their time needlessly because we have this ridiculous understanding and it has to be filled. It's a spatial container, so you must fill it with spatial acts. That is terrible. That engenders anxiety, depression, this nihilistic malaise where everyone in my generation it really does feel like you're working to die. It's because our understanding of time, remember, it's not time, it's space-time. So we can see how our ordering of time and mental time and our bastardization of it is coming back to haunt us in the spatial world. Let's see. Man today also lacks a secure base. Magic Man was sheltered in mystery, as we today in sleep are still immersed in the nocturnal depths of the world. Like us in deep sleep, he was most profoundly sheltered. This is the world as cavern. Everything is holistic, and it's almost like the womb. It's life-giving, it's life-affirming, life-saving, life-sustaining. Mythical man was still secure, but his security, pervaded by the terrors as well as the bliss of dreams, held him suspended within the polar sway of events. And mental man, at least in his waking state, had already emerged from the shelter of the magic and the enclosure of the mythical worlds. His growing ego consciousness freed him to a great extent from the earlier forms of being, and his previously sheltered existence gave way to his own efforts to gain security. He achieved this security by means of his new faculty of directing thought, which enabled him to create world systems and to grasp realities that gave him stability in one respect in the form of philosophemes, and in another in the scientific understanding of matter. So mental man, rational man, mental consciousness structure, what they've done is that all those other the unperspectival world, that has been delegitimized, that has lost its exclusive claim to validity. So now man must rebuild his own world, and he does that through philosophy, through rational thought, and through science. But of course, that will never be as secure. It will never confer the amount of psychological unity, security, and contentment that a cavern-like world of the magic structure and the 2D closed-filled circle that always closes in on itself and always, like you said, encloses. That's gone. Everything's been shattered. Everything has to be put back to pieces. Let's see. Whereas magic sheltering was still a genuine shelter, and the mythical, because it was already in motion, provided henceforth only enclosure, the security of the mental structure was, in accordance with its nature, purely fictive, that is, a design and projection of security by the ego onto the external world. If you want to reduce the mental structure to a sentence, here it is. Purely fictive, that is, a design and projection of security by the ego onto the external world. That is the mental structure. It is a projection of the ego as a matter of safety onto the world. Not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, I have a computer that we're dealing with. I have a microphone that we're dealing with. Great. But it does not engender that same security. It is a projection at the end of the day. You are not seeing the itself, as Gebser likes to say. The fiction of the security became obvious when the mental structure became deficient and degenerated into mere rationality. Ever since the inadequacies of the rational came to light, man has suffered fears of exposure, abandonment, and quote-unquote being thrown. Remember, that's a reference to Heidegger. Heidegger feels like the underlying core meaning of what it means to be human is to come into the world and being thrown, almost like this chaotic, you've just been thrown into the wilderness, and I snap my hands and you wake up. Now, of course, if you take on this view, that's gonna create some anxiety. That's gonna be a problem. You have no security, no home to run to, no motherly or paternal figure to go to for contentment or security. But that did not happen. Say what you will about the unperspectival world. There was no being thrown in the unperspectival world of the magic structure or the mythical structure. Everything was closed either by the cave, which was very secure psychologically, or the 2D flat circle, which enclosed and always fell in on each other. So yes, it was a little worse, but it still retained a sufficient degree of wholeness that conferred psychological unity and contentment. A psychological unity and contentment that we need as human beings to thrive. The rationalists do not understand this. He believes that he is standing at the brink, faced with the nothingness of the abyss, where the most courageous, quote, most courageous, assume their compulsory pose of grim heroism, Ernest Younger and Jean-Paul Sartre, or attempt to escape it by retreat into myth, as of late Martin Heidegger. It's interesting he says Sartre. I don't know very much about Sartre, so you philosophy guys, I genuinely would love to hear if you guys can draw a connection between, quote, most courageous, assume their compulsory pose of grim heroism, and he connects that to Younger and Sartre. I'm a little surprised he didn't say Nietzsche there. But maybe that's my own ignorance on display. The eruption of time must seem to everyone still convinced of the exclusive validity of the rational as the ultimate destroyer of the systems and conceptions that were deemed secure and afforded a sense of security. But the eruption of time is destructive only if we fail to realize what quote-unquote time actually is. If we are able to realize this, the eruption is not a further and ultimate loss of shelter and security, but rather a liberation. There is yet another implication of this, quote, I have no time, unquote. The admission and declaration of impotence by a European-American man. Someone who has no time has no space. When someone tells you that, what are they really telling you? I don't have enough time. To do what? Something. That is to say, some sort of affected movement in the spatialized world. I don't have enough time to do my homework. I don't have enough time to pay my bills. I don't have enough time to go see my family. It's not just time on the abstract. It's time directly connected to space. That is to say, movements in the external world, doing something. You don't have enough time for action in a spatial world. There's an implication there, and I think people misunderstand. It's not space and time. It is space-time. He's either at an end or he is free. He is at an end if he does not realize the implications of having no time, that is, that space has absorbed time, or that everything has become rigid and lifeless. The haste and harassment themselves, a useless spinning of wheels, as well as busy managerism, can be considered the counterpole of such rigidification. I want to hear him explain that further. Or if he does not, actually, I'm going to give an interpretation. So he says when you turn time into space, things, what does he say? The haste and harassment, themselves a useless spinning of wheels, as well as a busy managerism, can be considered the counterpole of such rigidification. What happens is when you take time as an intensity, something that imbues and imparts meaning, intensity, passion, and purpose to movements in the spatial world, and you turn it into an extensity, that is to say, denude the intensity of all those characteristics, what do you get? You get this lifeless, passionless, mechanical wheel in a factory just kind of humming and hawing, and there's no life here. There's nothing that the soul can grab on. There is nothing that the romantics can say, hey, I need something. All I need is just a crumb, and I can turn it into a pie. Just give me something. And there is nothing, because you've taken an intensity which imparts meaning into an extensity that detracts meaning by imposing space where that meaning is. Or if he does not realize that time, when employed as a mere divider, dissolves space. But if he realizes that quote-unquote time denotes and includes all previous time forms, he is free. Only the recognition of all temporal forms which co-constitute man can disassociate him from the exclusive validity of the mental time form, establish a certain detachment, and enable him to integrate them. The courage to accept along with the mental time concept the efficacy of pre-rational magic timelessness and irrational mythical temporicity makes possible the leap into irrational time freedom. Repeat for emphasis. The courage to accept, along with the mental time concept, the efficacy of pre-rational magic timelessness and irrational mythical temporicity makes possible the leap into irrational time freedom. We are no longer privileging exclusively the mental form of time. It's borderline. It could be respected, I guess, if you want. But we are balancing it and respecting it and treating it as an equal to magical timelessness and mythical temporicity, the 2D day and night coming and going. This is important too. This is not a freedom from previous time forms, since they are co-constituents of every one of us. It is to begin with the freedom for all time forms. Not, when I say time freedom, it's not freedom from time, it's freedom for time. The ability to consciously understand all the time forms and sort of deploy them or integrate them. That is what time freedom is. Only this form of freedom, which proceeds from the concretion and integration of all time forms, and which can be achieved only by a consciousness which is free to stand, quote-unquote, above, if you will, the previous time forms, can bring about a conscious advance or approximation to origin. So this ability to, in a very 4D way, step back from thought itself and kind of analyze the stuff, that's going to be the vehicle to understanding this stuff. It is from origin, which is not bound to time, that all time forms constituting us have mutated. It is from origin, which is not a temporal beginning, but an immaterial spiritual source out of which these structures mutate discontinuously, which is not bound to time, that all time forms constituting us have mutated. It all begins with origin, and origin is ever present. Origin lies, quote-unquote, before all timelessness, temporicity, and time. Wherever man becomes conscious of the pre-given, pre-conscious, originary pre-timelessness, he is in time freedom, consciously recovering its presence. This mutation will bear its fruits of transforming the world if we succeed in superseding the eruption of time. But that is tantamount to what we have called the presentation of origin, which can be achieved only by the successful fulfillment of the main task posed by the new mutation, the coming to consciousness of time freedom of the achronon, the discontinuous rather than continuous time freedom. Beautifully put. Let me see if I can take some of these off real quick. All right. Now we got a couple pages left, and I'm going to read mostly all of it, but that's okay. So this next section is the awakening consciousness of the awakening consciousness of integrity or the whole. The coming to awareness of quote-unquote time in its full complexity is a precondition for the awakening consciousness of time freedom. The freedom from time, in turn, is the precondition for the realization of the integral consciousness structure that enables us to perceive the aperspectival world. The whole can be perceived only aperspectively. When we view things in a perspectival way, we see only segments. In conceptual terms, however, we can only approach the whole by way of integrals, or totalities. But what are integrals? This frequently used concept must be defined in more specific terms because of its destructive effects, right down to the totalitarian conceptions where it was linked with the vitalist principle and represented only the vital aspect of time. An integral is not a fusion of discrete material parts. If it were, it would be only an amassment or sum. That would be, say, in a spatial... what does he call it? What is he... Amalgamation? Is that the word he uses? A spatial accumulation. That's not what it is. Nor is an integral the fusion of material parts with one of the possible temporal aspects as in totalitarianism. True integrals are constituted only where we assist spatial and temporal components in their own way to form a mutual enduring efficacy. So essentially an understanding of four-dimensional wholeness or integrity. Not just wholeness in a three-dimensional way where we just kind of put spatial parts together and then add up the sum. No, we have to do that and then also take into account this four-dimensional intensity that's intensifying and affecting these changes. A true integral in this sense is, quote, man as the integrality of his mutations, which we talked about. Integrals, therefore, are not summations of parts, but occur where parts, which are always spatially bound, are consciously perceived with the powers which actualize them, that is to say, time. Temporal functions together with spatial matter form integrals. Let me repeat that for emphasis. Temporal, which say anything related to time, temporal functionals together with spatial matter form integrals. There you go. An integral mode of perception, as represented today by several branches of knowledge, has not yet been able to establish itself in the public consciousness because the man of today continues to think and act in accord with the three-dimensional conceptual world. Therefore, he continued to regard only one aspect of the world as real, the spatial. Time for him has remained what it was, chronological time, or at best terms of delivery or expiration, and perhaps the span of life itself, although that too is mostly forgotten, since it is a form of time which, because of its restricting effect, elicits feelings of anxiety. What are the implications of such a partial... Oh, we're going to get into some really good stuff here. This is going to be some good anti-rationalist stuff. What are the implications of such a partial and single aspect view of reality? One implication is that we are not able to view the world integrally, but instead segment the world. Who does that sound like? Yet it should be no surprise that anyone who realizes or recognizes only one aspect of the world, such as space, when the other, time, is already fully awakened to its efficacy and reality in man's consciousness, will one day find himself partitioned, or will seem to be only a fragment of a mass. That would mean that he is fragmented along with his world, or that he fragments and destroys himself, a prospect now imminent because of nuclear fission. What is the mistake being made? The mistake the rationalists always make. They take the whole, sector apart from it, in this case, space-time, sector space from time, and then treat space as if it is all there is. It's all they do. And then they go. They're shocked when things start going terribly, and society starts falling apart, and everyone starts going crazy, and we start killing each other. Good job, everyone. Well done. Well done, rationalists. It's good to hear you've come down from the mountains and saved all of us. By the way, don't worry, my Kill Rationalism series will always continue. I just have to listen to time. When time tells me to make a new episode, I will make a new episode. Continuing. By unleashing 2 world wars, our Europe has begun to a suicidal extent this self-destruction. So there you go. Some might think this example ill-advised, believing that we can still blame one neighbor or the other for all our misfortunes. But there are still more indications of the possibly transient, self-inflicted impotence of our continent. Notice what he's doing here. This is interesting. He's not really viewing it as nations. He's viewing it as a whole, in this case, Europe. It's like he just said, you can always point the finger, but he's going to explain why Europe as a whole should be held responsible. But there are still more indications of the possibly transient, self-inflicted impotence of our continent. Let us not forget that the theories which have completely transformed the continents of our time were born in Europe, and yet it would seem that we have for the time being been deaf to the serious consequences of these theories. We have created them, but are unable to control them. To single out just one example of our impotence and paralysis, we could point to the fate of materialistic theories, which were, like many others, conceived and worked out in Europe and have transformed the world. Marx. But they have been misused by others because we failed to muster the intensity of consciousness so as to govern them responsibly. Instead of ourselves undertaking to reshape the obsolete three-dimensional foundations of the new sociological theories, we have permitted the successor of European culture, Russia, to misuse them. So what is he talking about? In Russia, the Marxism of Hegel, Marx, and Engels has been presumptuously driven to extremes and perverted into Leninism and then Stalinism, because Europe adamantly retained a dualistic world conception long after its time. I would like to hear him explain that a little more. It obviously was taken to extremes, Marxism, in the form of Leninism and Stalinism. That's undeniable. But I'm interested in how that relates to the dualism. I hope he expands on that. I haven't gotten to that part in the book yet. We of the European Atlantic cultural community have as yet been unable to make the leap at the crucial moment from the three-dimensional world of our fathers into the four-dimensional reality of our day. And as long as we fail to make this leap, crisis, uncertainty, and anxiety will continue to prevail. They can destroy us in the short run unless we realize the new world reality. We must, in other words, attain a new attitude toward the actualities of the new reality, which are crystallizing in a new perception of the world. So, there's a new dimension in the world, and it is on us, every single individual, yes, to muster the intensity of consciousness to understand this new dimension, this new reality on its own terms, so we can channel its efficient aspects healthily and not destroy the world. Our realization of this new attitude will be decisive in solving our pressing problems because the new frame of mind resulting from it corresponds to the new reality and is therefore sound. It is in any event sounder than the cold and dogmatic fanaticism of Eastern stamp, and for that reason is more certain, stronger, and superior. This is an interesting point. This is a really interesting point he's about to make. It is not might but strength that is victorious, for might or potency is always threatened by impotence. Anyone able to set aside power is liberated from impotence. That's a really interesting spiritual view of power, strength, and might. That's fascinating. Surely a reference to the might makes right type. Maybe. Since we already live in a four-dimensional reality, it is no longer legitimate for us to think and act mindlessly and unreflectively as though we were still in the three-dimensional world of our fathers and forefathers, rationalist-owned and dominated. Is there really any justification for us to feel insecure and depressed because of our present poor management of our affairs? It is by now only too obvious that something fundamental is out of kilter. To illustrate our predicament, we would cite a graphic example. We move about in our modern world in the same way a quote-unquote wild man from the primeval forest might have acted in the world of our fathers. So take someone from the magical structure and put him in the mental structure, see what, as impotent as that person would be in that world, that's how impotent we are in the four-dimensional world now. That's how impotent the rationalists are. So if you're arguing with the rationalists, you make it clear that you are no longer, you have become so deficient and so ridiculous and so absurd that you are on the same level as deficient magic man. So how about that? They won't like that. Primitive man is anchored at best in the pre-rational or irrational world, and experiences it more or less vegetatively without the support of conceptual thought, and thus without any idea of space. How different from the three-dimensional, mental, rational, conceptual, space and thought world of our fathers, who felt quite at home so long as the possibility of another dimension world did not exist for their consciousness. Or yet another comparison. We act and react like something attempting to fly a supersonic aircraft in a room. That is, we attempt to employ a four-dimensional creation, the aircraft, within a three-dimensional world, the room. The airplane exceeds and transcends our erstwhile spatial perception. Again, it's a misapplication of the value of time. You've only applied it in relation to conquering space. That is a complete misunderstanding. I wouldn't be upset with that if you had an understanding of the other ways of doing things, but you don't. A third example will suggest what can be gained if we include time in our mode of inquiry. The gains will be apparent if we successfully incorporate time into our reality as an integral complex, rather than as a conceptualized spatial part and partitioner. We refer to our continuous enslavement to nationalism. This is interesting. Nationalism is prototypical of three-dimensional thinking, and it makes sense because when you think of a nation, you are exactly that, thinking in terms of an abstract concept. And when you have a nation, whatever attributes, characteristics, or whatever qualities that you attribute to that nation, it's kind of existing in this static spatial domain. And we're going to explain why that's a problem. To consider man as an offspring of a nation is to perceive the nature and ways of one's own nation as being an enduring ideal. Such a static view is a three-dimensional, perspectival, and fixed conception. Yet on the basis of recent deliberations and studies on the philosophy of history and on sociology, we should be regarding nations as being dynamic efflorescences of a larger cultural context. And efflorescence is the act or process of flowering or blooming, a burst of development or activity. So this seems to be pretty clear as a reference to Spengler, this idea of civilizational cycles. Spengler touched upon the magic principle, if you will, the vital principle of a nation. So you start one way and you kind of go through these little stages or these dynamic changes. Again, when you think of a nation and you attribute this is what nation is and what it stands for and what it believes, you are locking it into a static, spatialized system that has now been rendered useless because we recognize we're in a dynamic flux. This is why the postmodernists say there are no real objective definitions, and I can be gender whatever, I can be gender fluid, because each moment to moment is new. Foucault kind of understood this with power. Although such an awareness does not abolish nationalism, it at least transcends and integrates it into a more encompassing integral reality. It is not the nations, the parts, but the broader cultural context of the whole that holds the possibility of effectuality and of awakening consciousness. So nationalism, that's just kind of a downstream incidental part. What we really should be focusing on is the people that populate that nation, their cultural changes, their values, their philosophies, all that stuff. This particular example seems fruitful and revealing, since as it shows that a new and constructive perception of the world or a phenomena is not only possible, but even embodies two essential components with which this perception can be realized. These components are the temporal and the integral. The temporal component appears in our understanding that nations are unique, dynamic outgrowths of a larger culture and not merely static ideas. Repeat for emphasis. The temporal component appears in our understanding that nations are unique, dynamic outgrowths of a larger culture and not merely static ideas. Hello, globalism. Moreover, as soon as we take this temporal component into account, the integral moment is also manifest, since it integrates the aspects which heretofore have been seen in spatial terms as being inimical and antithetic into an integral or whole, achieving a new point of departure and a new perception in an essential area. For this reason, it is remarkable that all of the sciences today are manifesting a tendency toward an integral mode of inquiry, although positive results are obtained only when time is taken into account in the one or the other of its manifestations. This development has given rise to the recognition that the old antithesis between inorganic and organic does not exist, having been replaced by a closer relationship between physics and biology that is not restricted only to quantum biology. This also holds true of biology and psychology, where the old dualism of body and soul has given way to a psychosomatic medicine that has evolved an integral conception of man, a perception of man as a whole, as in the works of G.R. Heyer and Arthur Joris. These integral achievements that together demonstrate a dissolution of erstwhile antagonisms and dualisms were possible only because their originators had consciously or unconsciously divorced themselves from an exclusively three-dimensional spatial framework. So that is the key point here. If you want to awaken integral consciousness, you have to, the second you start to feel that you're being too rational, that's a good thing, because you're being aware of these things. Stop doing that. If you need to slow down and just take a break, do that. Awakening integral consciousness is the balance between making happen, space, and letting happen, time, all right? That is the key. You cannot privilege, you can't put these into dualistic antitheses like the rationalists do and privilege one or the other. You must balance these two. Wherever we encounter these integral endeavors, which take into consideration the full efficacy and varied manifestations of the thematics of time, we are conceptually approaching the whole. It is perceptible only through a mode of realization sufficiently bold to allow us to transcend mere conceptualization, while preventing us from a regression to the imagistic world of the psyche or the magic vital sphere. Mere mental wakefulness is not sufficient to realize the new reality. Diurnal wakefulness achieves only partition and division. It sheds light on the path, the Tao, as long as mental consciousness dwells in the phenomena of diurnal brightness. Itself, like conceptual time, a divider, dividing the night, dreams, sleep, and the world. So rationality only works in areas where it works, right? In areas where it's quantifiably measurable, consciously known, we're working within the brightness of, we can be very clear in our thought. Everything is bright. There's nothing dark or vague or twilight or anything like that. As long as its dividing is not an end in itself, it indirectly yields valid knowledge of the undivided. But if the world is regarded only through wakefulness, it loses its undivided dreamlike and somnolent aspects and precipitates their separation. The dividing deed leads to death, the death of man as entire culture. The wakefulness, then, is not adequate, least of all the attitude of all-or-nothing wakefulness. Clarity, however, is adequate, for it alone is free of brightness, twilight, and darkness, and is able to penetrate the whole where somnolent timelessness, somnial temporicity, and mental conceptuality all become diaphanous. So when he says clarity, that's kind of a synonym for diaphanous, understanding the world transparently. That is to say, the itself, which is the world, no longer obscured by the projections made by the structures. Anyone who perceives in this manner is free from time and can see through the whole in which he partakes, not as a part, but integrally. And that, my friends, is where we will leave it off today. I love you guys. You guys are the best. We are just pushing our way through, and we're getting some good stuff. So I will miss you very much. I can't wait. I don't know if we'll be able to read more Gebser today because I got baby duties, but maybe tomorrow I'll get some more in, and I'll see you guys soon, man. I love you guys very, 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 very much. You guys are awesome. Let me know what you guys thought of the lecture, if there are any cool ideas, and I'll see you guys next week. Thank you, guys.